Good afternoon, everyone. This is John Stevenson here over at Nevada Partners, doing yet another installment of the Nehemiah Project Podcast with Bishop Derek Rson. How are you, sir?
I'm great.
The freshly graduated, newly minted, heavily decorated,
yes, sir,
heavily commemorated,
yes,
masters en route to the doctorate.
Route to the doctorate.
With what school?
About 2 weeks.
If I had to guess what school,
well, the masters came out Grand Canyon University.
What?
GCU.
I would have never guessed.
That's right, up Lopes. And then, of course, the Kingdom Builders Bible Seminary here in Nevada.
Okay.
Is the doctorate of divinity.
Okay.
So that's in the next, I think, 2 weeks from now.
Okay.
Yeah.
That'll be your doctorate.
Tomorrow. That'd be a doctorate.
Okay.
Yeah. So
that's all. Congratulations.
Oh man, I appreciate it.
Congratulations.
It's hard work.
What else? Well, I bet it was. Just for the sake of out of curiosity, what are the benefits of that master's and that divinity that doctorate you're picking up for the sake of ministry, for the sake of community influence? How does that translate into practical benefits for what you're doing?
Well, the master's is in public administration.
Okay,
naturally being involved in, government affairs and, working with government officials, being in these spaces for the community. Mm-hmm. I felt like that was a secular degree that I thought I needed to get, just to be more educated and informed. Mm-hmm. So that was the reason for pursuing that, which I just got, as a caveat, I just got approved to do a second doctorate degree in public administration out of Liberty University.
Okay.
So likely as I am graduating with the doctorate in divinity in the next couple of weeks, by the end of June, I think it is, I'll probably be kicking into the doctorate program for public administration.
That's incredible. So now with that doctorate in public administration, typically doctorates, are either for like an explicit practice or for teaching. Which way will you take yours? Have you decided yet?
I really haven't decided. I don't know if I really want to do the teaching piece, but I haven't really decided. That's a good question.
Yeah.
I haven't really decided. I just kind of wanted to take it to the last step. And in the meantime, of course, my wife is just got accepted into the doctorate program in Regent University for doctorate of Christian education.
Okay.
So simultaneously, she started hers just I think about 2 weeks ago. And so, education is important, man. It's especially in this season. So the more information I think that you can acquire and adopt and be indoctrinated with, I think it tends to, if nothing else, man, it puts you in the right settings. And then when you are in these spaces and sitting at these tables, you're not talking, off the cuff, right? You've been able to articulate and really be able to contribute to the conversation. So
I'm going to make a prediction. And if I was a man of more confidence, I'd call it more close to a prophecy.
Okay.
But I lack that confidence.
Okay.
So one of the things that's emerging in entrepreneurial spaces, particularly on the education side, is this concept of social entrepreneurialism, the kind of entrepreneurialism that is lifting people out of poverty and making entrepreneurial opportunities more democratic. Because there's opportunity. There's talent is universal, but opportunity is not. And so what I know at UNLV, they've even got a director now of social entrepreneurialism for that very purpose. I would not be surprised to see you or people like you start looking at things as far as social public administration. Knowing how to use public administration in a way that's explicit about lifting people out of poverty and getting more opportunities, to people who don't otherwise get them, and not just as a kind of a value neutral approach, but more undergirded in a moralist approach. The morality of a socially conscious, social minded public administration. That's what I see you going.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, you talked about the divinity, the doctorate of divinity. I was kind of, when I was looking at this and kind of assessing it, I was really trying to see how, number one, we could balance the two, right? Because whenever, in America,
balance which two?
Both the church and the state, or secular and church, or government and church is really the theme. But how do you balance them? Because they both somehow intersect. At some point, they're going to intersect.
They're interdependent,
right? And they're interdependent.
Right.
So, how do we, introduce church or religion into the secular world from the standpoint of evangelism, ministry, introducing Christ into the secular world, but yet being, relevant, right? And understanding how government works, because, of course, government affects us all, right? It don't matter if you're in church, not in church, religious, non-religious, atheist, agnostic, it doesn't matter. Government is going to affect us all, right? So how do we tie these two together, right? Because if you go through our history, these two are kind of intermingled. They intermingled themselves. If you go back to even Martin Luther King, that was religion, they were fusing religion, using religion as the base, right? And they were dealing with government issues. So that's how I kind of begin to assess it from the standpoint, because again, man, I'm 42 years into ministry. I'm a second generation pastor. So of course, you got grandfathers, and my grandfather, my great uncle were pastors. They pastored 50 plus years, right? I've come along, I did it for my last church took me into about 28 years, right? So I've had all of this life experience, right? Ministry experience prior to receiving the degree. But what I've kind of learned is a lot of times people can respect your knowledge and respect your experience, right? When they see that you've been through the system. Okay. Right.
When you understand the inner workings,
you understand the workings of the system, right? So you've matriculated through the educational system, and so now all of a sudden your experience is respected, right? What you say, your
innovations are respected,
absolutely,
because you understand the inner workings of the system.
Because you understand the inner workings of the system. So now people look at you differently. People embrace you differently. People actually now want to listen to what you have to say. But really, to answer your question, I just think we're at a point now where we really have to start being more driven by knowledge. Right. Even though this is a era of knowledge, it's just knowledge. It's everywhere. You can, somebody said, I heard it on, I think it was a post where, if we wanted knowledge, we had to go to the encyclopedia. Right.
Right.
And
you had to know what you wanted.
And then you had to know what you wanted.
It wasn't offered to you. No. You had to know what you had to
know what you're looking for. In many cases, you couldn't find it. But now, we got super highway of information. Google anything. You can go to, Gemini. You can go to any IA platform, and bam, you're just tapped into wealth of information. But now knowing how to properly execute it, apply it, then becomes necessary, I think, through the educational process.
Okay. You said something early on in there, and I want to kind of circle back to it for a second, because I think I want to get some clarity out of it.
Okay.
You had mentioned that you and I'm paraphrasing because you said it better than the way I'm going to repeat it. Something along the lines of wanting to bring religion into the public space, kind of thing. And that's a distillation of what I think you're saying. What I want to ask you about is clarity of that, in that there's two approaches. One approach is to bring Christ in the public space, and the other one is to bring the love of Christ into the public space. Because bringing Christ in the public space there's a kind of an establishment of religion, or maybe a prioritizing of religion that may get some pushback, but bringing the love of Christ into the public space doesn't get much pushback. It won't get much pushback from your Hindu friends, your Muslim friends, your not even so much your atheist friends. So, did I understand that what you're saying correctly, or do you see that? Do you see where I'm coming from with that?
Yeah,
that distinction
listen,
Christ and love of Christ?
I never would have articulated that way.
Okay, because I use hands.
And yeah. I would never articulate it that way, but that's a great point. That is because when you look at it from a doctrinal perspective, right? That's going to always get pushback, right? Because there's plethora of religions out here that believe plethora of things, but I feel as believers of Jesus Christ, our responsibility is to somehow demonstrate and share the gospel of Jesus Christ. Well, if you understand the gospel, its definition just simply means good news. Mm-hmm. But then Jesus makes this statement. He says, "They will know that you are my disciples because of the love that you show."
Exactly.
Right? Between one another.
Not your piety.
It's not your piety. Mm-hmm. It's not being arrogant. It's not, how many scriptures can you quote?
Right.
What the world is looking for is the love of Christ being demonstrated. Mm-hmm. And I think that is what our assignments are now.
Agreed.
When we get into secular spaces, governmental spaces, is that how do we demonstrate and show that we have the love of Christ? How do we carry ourselves? How do we behave when controversial subject matters come up, or government issues come up, and then there's this great divide? How does the Christian behave? Does the Christian become the resolver or the peacemaker, or does the so-called Christian or believer then agitate the conversation to get it to become explosive, right? But I would agree. I never saw it that way, because as forestated, there's no way we can in this season usher in doctrine, right? And our beliefs, if you will, that's reserved for those that accept Christ, right? And once they accept Christ and then they come into the way of Christ, they now connect to ministry or connect to a church, then it is our responsibility to indoctrinate. Right. Because each religion has a doctrine, it has a dogma. Mm-hmm. If you're Muslim, if you're going to Islam, there's a dogma. Mm-hmm. And once you have accepted that you're Islamic or you're Muslim, right? Then you're indoctrinated. Mm-hmm. And so it's the same thing with the Pentecostal, the Christian religion, is now, we as Bible believers, once the convert comes in, accepts Christ and says, now I want to commit. So now what you're saying is you want to know more about Jesus Christ, more about the gospel. Mm-hmm. And so as the pastor or the leader or the preacher, now we indoctrinate, but when you're dealing with the secular, what the secular is looking for is love, man. They want to see the love of Christ. They do. That's what they always talk about. And whenever it seems that the preacher, and that's one of the big challenges now that, being on social media, that the preacher is wrestling with, right? And and in my opinion, I think that we have kind of went beyond the time of doing live posts. This is my opinion. right?
Okay.
Our church services being live,
Mm-hmm.
because you have to remember that was a creative method that we used for COVID. When people couldn't come to churches, they couldn't leave their houses. And so we created this live platform where we allow people to see the totality of our services. But you got to know, especially if you're in the Black African American church, and if you put the little caveat, it's Pentecostal, right? Or it's the dancing, shouting, speaking in tongue kind of type church, man, there's so many different things that go on, in the church setting, right? That if you're not cognizant of how the inner workings of the church works, then it can become offensive to the one that's not a church goer.
Right.
So if they're looking at church, right, scrolling through, and then that's why we got so many of these bloopers, or so many people that are pulling out little sound bites, right, of church services, something that the preacher said. Now
out of context.
Yeah, and they're all totally out of context.
And context matters.
And context matters. You can't assess a sound bite, right, that you just got now, because you don't know what happened prior to, right? You don't know what caused this preacher to respond the way he responded, or this singer to say what they said. We got the shut the door, thing with Bishop Marvin Sapp, good friend of mine, by the way. And first of all, it was a clip that was 2-3 years back. It's 2025, so that's something that happened like in 2022. Then it was at a conference. It was at a convention, an annual convention that these are believers that they attend, and they're delegates of the convention, so they understand the inner workings of their convention, and their, why they're coming together, all of the lingo, all of the directives, right? And so here you take a sound bite and you say, he said, shut the doors. Close the doors, right? Well, this is during an offering period time, which in most cases, let's start with the fact that it's a safety measure, right? You want to close the door, number one, because you're not at a local church. You're at a convention hall, or you're at a banquet hall, right? Or ballroom. So people are coming, strangers. You don't know who's what. We know that people are robbing churches and holding churches to gunpoint and preachers. Oh, yes.
I did not know that.
Yes. So close the doors. Now, close the doors could have been for the fact that he wanted to keep people that didn't need to come in, because now we're getting ready to raise money. Or it could have been the fact that he wanted to keep people from going out. Right? Because if you understand the inner workings of the church, you understand giving is a worship. It's a form of worship. It's a form of reverence, right? So even as a kid, I was taught, man, they're raising the offering. Don't you walk. Don't you talk. These are the inner workings of the sanctuary that is just been perpetuated forever, right? But if you're not a church goer, or you got something against the church's operation in this season, now all of a sudden you pick out little things and give sound bites, and then the sound bite wasn't correct. He's telling us to lock the doors. That's not what he said. He said, shut the doors, close the doors. And so I think, and I said all of that to say, in my personal opinion, think that we have to rethink and relook at how we're, as churches, putting up live post, because live post is no editing. Most things you see on TV has been edited. What I think would cause controversy or concerns, I edited out, even though we ran it live last week, right? The public gets to see it this week because it allows me to edit out what is not usable footage, right? But here we still doing lives, I think, out of season. I think, and not saying that we shouldn't do to have some kind of recognition or some kind of presence, if you will, for our ministries and churches. These are good platforms for evangelizing. But I think we have to be very careful that we provide solid content and we don't allow the enemy or the one that is not pro-church the opportunity to literally just dissect and ultimately, misuse or mishandle, information that could be, toxic or be something that's bad to the one that's watching, right? So, I think we have to, church is evolving, but our society is also evolving, but they're not going, I don't think, in the same direction. When we were coming up, we had to go to church, man. Everybody knew something about God, right? I can even go back historically, if you even deal with Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali, when he decided to become a part of the nation, and he changed his name, man, he got so much kickback, right? Because basically the leading religion in America was some form of Christianity.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So when he decided he wanted to go, with the Nation of Islam, and he changed his name from Cassius Clay to Muhammad Ali, oh man, he got so much pushback to a point where they were going to cancel certain fights, and so because the basically Christianity, either you were Christian or you were Catholic. Even Jews had a challenge, right? So Christian was really the majority religion that dominated, even back then. And so we grew up, man. You had to pray before you went to sleep, and you had to say your blessing over your food. You couldn't eat your food, man. They pop your hand because you grabbed the biscuit. Put that down, say the blessing, right? So everything had this Christian, theme to it, structure to it. You went to church. Most of us had to go. Even if the mama didn't go, she sent you with somebody, with the grandmama, So if the mama wasn't in church, the grandmama was in church. And so she took everybody. But I think in this season is really, I think we're circling back around, in my opinion, where now the church has to understand its role in government, because it's going to play a very significant role. Trump's administration is the evangelicals. He's leaning on the evangelicals and because that's his base. But I think we have to know African American churches, whether it's Lutheran, Methodist, Pentecostal, non-denomination, needs to know the inner workings of how government works, so that we can make contributions to it, or we can fight against it, and we know how to stand up and make our voice heard and literally change laws, change legislation. But a lot of church people are so just locked in to just coming to church and praying, and I'm a firm believer prayer works. But a lot of times we think prayer changes things. That's what they say, and we said it for years, songs on it. Prayer changes things, but I kind of would disagree to the fact that I think prayer changes you. And then you are equipped to change things.
Become the change agent.
You become the change agent.
Right.
But we're kind of sitting back, praying, waiting to see what's going to happen, and then we don't take action. But I think we have to take action, especially in this season. But we got to know, you got to know who key players are in your community. You got to know who key players are in your city. And then you got to know how to get to the table. But here's the deal. But then once I get to the table, I got to know what to say at the table. I got to know how to engage, because this person is not Christian. This person don't know the gospel, but this is the billionaire. This is the millionaire. This is the one that's making shifts and changes. They're changing landscapes because they have the revenue. They have the capital to build this and to build this engine and to build this economical engine so that their communities are viable. Their communities are they're economically strong. When you look at Seven Hills and you look at Mountain Edge and Summerlin, these are viable communities here in the South Valley, right? Every area around us has an engine. It has an economic engine. Every part of the area. If you go south, there's a casino hotel, economical engine. If you go west, there's casino, hotel, economical engines. There's engines in the east. There's engines in the north. And let's be honest, North Las Vegas is like literally just blowing up off the map, right? Until you get to ground zero. When you get to ground zero in the African American community, we have no economic engine. We don't really understand how government works. People are not knowledgeable. They're constituents, and seemingly everybody has a voice now. Everybody's running to the mic. Everybody can make a post. You can, say what's on your mind. But as we often say, just because you're talking loud don't mean you're correct, right? So, people are talking. There's so much misinformation that's out there. Incorrect information because people are not cognizant of how the system works. And instead of them just trying to get into the right spaces to be educated, to learn, they're not in the spaces. So then when development comes, as an example, to ground zero, I'm calling, Circle West ground zero. But, when you're talking about development coming to the west side, they don't know the difference. And I can use the hand thing. They don't know the difference between something that is a service versus something that's economically driven. Right. Because, it doesn't help us per se to keep building fast food restaurants on Martin Luther King Boulevard. Right. Those are service entities. They're franchises. They're designed to service those in the community of the passer buyers, if you will, to feed them, service them, right? But we don't make money from that
because you're not getting people from the outer reaches of the community coming to that Burger King.
Well, not even so much that. The fact of the matter is it's a franchise. So then it kind of goes back to what you were alluding to with entrepreneurship, sole proprietor. So basically, it's empowering economically the sole proprietor or the partners that own the franchise. And then maybe if possibly, I ain't never heard lately where McDonald's on Martin Luther King or Burger King or whatever's over there, Jack in the Box, have really given anything back into the community. Right. So this is something that they provide a service, they get compensated, right? Community doesn't benefit. We still sit desolate. We still sit, decaying. Our communities still are dilapidated because that's a service. I look at the West Library, the new one that they're building, which I think is phenomenal. That's going to be great, 40 million, I think. But again, it's something to service the community. It's not going to it's not going to economically give back to it or empower it per se. It doesn't create an engine, where if you went to the library and you invested money, then that money is somehow reinvested back into the community. It's a service. It's a free service for the community, which is needed, but when you're thinking of how do we drive this economy, how do you build and revitalize the historical West Side that's been sitting dilapidated for almost 60 years, right? No engine, no economic engine. So then when something does present itself, right? When something comes, it presents itself, here's possibly an opportunity that, could actually fit, right? Now you get the pushback. You get the pushback because the community or the constituents in the community don't understand how this system works. And so oftentimes with us as African Americans, we lose so many just viable opportunities that could have possibly caused our communities and neighborhoods to expand, to grow, to have some kind of economic base, to give some support to commerce and small businesses in our community, as we call them, the mom and pop businesses. Now we're providing relevant schools in our community. They're not dilapidated, broke down. We're using books that's 10 years old, curriculums that, are outdated, schools that are breaking down and floors that's caving in, air conditioning don't work in 105-degree weather. So I think that's where, now we're trying to, and we need to, in my opinion, tie and figure out how we can intertwine religion, intertwine, government, because the Black historically, Blacks, we've worked out the church. That's how everything we did out the church, and I see it kind of circling back to that. But we got to know how to get to the table, and then once we get to the table, we got to know what conversations to have at the table. Right.
So you had mentioned before we came on air that you've got a town hall coming up with some pretty high level politicians. Take everything you just articulated and distill it down into who's going to be at that meeting at the town hall, and how might everything you just articulated here be able to show up either as seeds or part and parcel of the discussion that you plan on having at this town hall?
Well, we're still kind of putting it together.
Okay.
We're targeting, I think it's June 30th. I think that's a Monday.
Okay.
At 6:00. And of course, Bishop McDonald is of course, I call him the bishop of the community. He's the community bishop. He has a heart for this community. I'm glad he's my bishop and my pastor, because he's even showed me the importance of community involvement. But nonetheless, he's spearheading that, and they're trying to get the 5 of the team, I guess, of the Congress, U.S. Congress and U.S. Senators together. And I always forget somebody out the loop, but
I do every time.
That's Masto, Susie Lee, Rosen, Horsford, and Titus.
Okay.
Are the 5 that they're looking at, to bring them to a setting and to just, listen to their issues. What are the issues? Well, we kind of know, but everybody don't know all of the issues. There's a plethora of issues out here, governmental issues and challenges that our country is dealing with, especially under this administration that I think personally is not trying to make America great again. I think he's trying to make white America great again. Because if you look at his administration, you don't see anybody of color a part of that administration. You don't see other ethnicities. There is no, Latina X part of that administration. You don't see any Asians that are part of the.
Yeah, one black guy over HUD.
Yeah, one black guy over HUD, which he's probably puppeting that dude. Right.
But HUD, never going to be and Joint Chiefs of Staff.
Absolutely.
It's never going to be.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Of course, it's HUD.
Right. It's HUD.
Yeah.
So, want to bring them in, have a town hall, bring in the community, the pastors, leaders of the community. We're working on focus groups. I know that NAACP is looking to be a partner with this and sponsor with this. I know National Action Network has agreed to be a part of this setting as well. And just, let them talk about all of the challenges and issues that they're fighting for on our behalf, and things that is coming down the pipeline,
Mm-hmm.
which I think, we need to do it. I give kudos to Congressman Horsford, because he's constantly making himself visible in the community. He was just here maybe 3 months ago,
Mm-hmm.
2 months ago or so, and he was just bringing us up on, what's going on in Congress and keeping us abreast.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, he is doing a bumper job. I think we've got some great government officials here, that make themselves available, make themselves visible in our various communities. Senator Dina Neal, who, is one of the state senators. She's in legislation now, passing bills and working on bills to get them passed. She was one of the key individuals, man, that got the Windsor Park piece, corrected. And for those homeowners that houses were sinking. And of course, she battled with North Las Vegas until such time she got it done. And so, just troopers like that, vanguards that are out here, making sure that, we have fair rights and opportunity to live a decent life, in such a very turbulent time.
I forgot to mention at the beginning, the views that are expressed in this conversation do not necessarily reflect those of Nevada Partners, UNLV, and maybe not even people we know and like. So these are our opinions. These are our
right,
thoughts.
Absolutely.
And so I don't want to necessarily confer approval or agreement, rather, with some of the organizations that we belong to.
Right. Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I forgot to put that at the beginning. So if you do have the meeting, and if you are able to pull up the town hall piece, what do you anticipate to be some of the big ticket items that might come up in discussion? And of those that might come up, what do you think the African American community in Las Vegas generally could or should get behind, and be what the Christian African American community should get behind in particular, and how so?
Man, that's so many out there. You got the DEI issue going on right now, diversity, equity, and inclusion. You've got ICE,
Right.
Which I thought was terrible. They released the young lady, a teenage girl.
Yeah.
And what are you doing?
Let's talk about the immigration one for a second, and how Black Christians, in your view, ought to position themselves, or how they ought to speak about or get involved with an issue that does not necessarily directly affect them, or so they think.
Again, this is my opinion. I really think our people are, they know it's wrong. They're speaking up kind of in a whisper, if you will.
Is it activism or slacktivism? Slacktivism is going online and just posting something. Activism is well, I have to suggest, a more of an active role. And so those are two. My hands again. And so, where one starts to veer into the other, it seems like that's where our action.
I think it's activism. What's the other one?
Slacktivism. So slacktivism is me going on Facebook and have my rant and feel like, I'm doing it. I'm out here making a change.
I think we're slacktivism right now, and I'm gonna tell you why. This is just my opinion.
Right.
I think when certain things don't affect our people in our community, we'll stay as silent as we can about it, or we'll whisper on it. Right. But we won't get told. Like right now, ICE is not coming for us.
No.
right?
Right.
It's kind of almost like when Bin Laden and you had the terrorism, right?
Right.
So we like, hey, they ain't strip searching us.
Right.
We ain't got to, hey, so
Right.
we're gonna go on through this security line.
Yeah.
And
They're not gonna stop me at Home Depot.
Exactly. So, and because of our 400 some odd year history of slavery and being, profiled and, all of these decades and generations of just being mistreated, injustice, disparities for just being Black, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when we are at a point where the spotlight's not on us, you know what I'm saying? We might whisper some things and post some stuff, but are we really gonna get in this fight? Because at some given point it could shift, and then all of a sudden now they're back on us again.
Right.
They're highlighting us. So I think we understand the struggle. I think we understand the injustice. I think that we are making statements concerning the injustice. ICE is it's just wrong.
Right.
Now, if you're going after the parties that you say you're going and you have a legitimate reason because they are common criminals or historical criminals or repeat offenders or violent offenders, then okay, it makes sense. But America has been about due process. You just don't snatch a cat up and then send them across the country, throw them into an international or a foreign prison without due process.
Right.
And then again, we have flashbacks as Black folk, because there's times when we never got due process, So, when you're looking at ICE, DEI, man, that most people think it's affecting Black folk. Actually, DEI was in place for the white folk. It's more white folk that's being affected and losing jobs from the dismissal of DEI than it is from African Americans. I think we're talking. We're definitely talking. But I think for us, for our people, I think we're trying to home in on what's affecting us. ICE ain't really affecting us. We're not trying to cross the border. We're not trying to, we don't have green cards per se.
But is that kind of short-sighted? Because you brought up a very good point in that because what's at issue is whether due process or following the rules is in play or not. And if we made it okay culturally as a society, we make it okay for any one group to not have to be dealt with by the rules, we made it fair for everybody to not be dealt with by the rules. And so if we do stand back and allow undocumented immigrants to be pushed around, without a stitch of due process, we've kind of normalized that behavior, and now media, African Americans, educational institutions, law firms, it's all fair game now. If due process is okay to be stripped here, we've normalized it.
I would agree. I would agree. I would agree to the fact that you're correct, because if we allow it here, then eventually it's going to spread. It's like cancer, because we've normalized it, right? But I think when it comes to African Americans, man, wherever we're not being mishandled per se, then we kind of step back, right? And then we focus in on the areas where we are being slighted or unfairly dealt with or mishandled, such as the disparities with economic, equity, where we're dealing with housing. The average, man, what is the average house now here in South Valley? They're building, I think it starts at 355,000 and goes up to maybe 538, 39,000, right? What, how many African Americans can actually afford housing to be a first time buyer of a single family housing, or even with the fact of just the skyrocketing of rent, there's no rent cap. So, now whereas before, when I first got here, man, you could get a 2-bedroom for $1,000, $1,200, right? Now a studio is 15, so we're kind of more homing in on stuff like housing, jobs, economic, equality, fairity. It's man, we got so many subject matters that's affecting our homes and our families, that the things that don't affect us directly. Now, when you say ICE, man, that might not affect you right now directly, but eventually, like you say, it will indirectly, because down the line now, they ain't getting due process. So now you're going to go to the next ethnic group, then you're going to move to the next ethnic group, and somewhere we're going to be in that number.
There's going to always be a reason for them to suspend, due process. In this case, they're going to say, well, they're illegal immigrants, so we're suspending due process. When they look at us, they're going to say, well, they're gang members.
Right.
Or they're or they're Black Lives Matter terrorists,
right,
or they're SNCC,
right,
terrorists,
right,
or they're
right.
Nation of Islam terrorists.
Right.
They're
gonna brand us in such a way to give us
exactly, and then we're gonna say, okay, prove it in court. We ain't got to prove it in court because we ain't dealing with due process,
right? Just
like we did, with
absolutely.
And so, I think. So this is my personal opinion on this.
Okay.
I feel like we are committing a twofold grave area, by not being, involved in injustice wherever it is. Number one, there's a practical reason for it that has a self-serving, thing. Even if not now, it does so later, because anything that smacks of intolerance or injustice or inequity, for anybody, it's never going to not hit us.
Oh yeah,
there is no version of injustice or inequity
that does not somehow find us.
Exactly,
you're correct.
And so there's no way on God's green earth we could, the African American community can ever look around and say, well, they just mess with trans people. Trans,
right.
You're next,
right. But you're next.
Because the pretext for the rationalization for that allow them to do that is coming your way.
Because that's what I told somebody. I said, now if they're doing them, you got to know. We might not be number 2, but we're gonna be number 3. We next somewhere. We're
always top 3.
Yes, sir.
There's no way any version of an inequity or an injustice or intolerance doesn't skips over us. It just doesn't happen. Second reason is that I am absolutely convinced that if you want to see moral courage, you need to model moral courage. And so if we see what is going on, with the Hispanic community or the LGBTQ community, and we say, what, that I got an ick factor about that. That's just wrong. Then there's something to be said about stepping forward, with the moral courage to say, we're calling this out. If nobody else says a word, we're gonna say something. And if you want to see moral courage, to me, you need to model it, or not defer to anybody else to model it. And I believe that the groups who are historically, the marginalized ones, or the ones who've been the victims of lack of moral courage, ought to be the first ones to jump up and down about moral courage. I expect to see African Americans speak out on injustices. I expect Jews to speak out on injustice. I expect LGBT. I expect anybody who's gone through it to speak up for whoever else is going through it now. That's my.
Yeah, I would agree. Again, I just think
I get the reason for wanting to stay out of it.
I just think these various ethnicities have other fights that's going on. If you look at, the Israelis, they're over there dealing with the Palestinians,
right.
Man. And right now, that's the priority on their list. When you look at us, we just trying to figure out how to survive. Now we're in survival mode as Black people. And so, we see this over here in our peripheral. We see about the undocumented immigrant, the ICE, misnomer. But at the end of the day, it's in our peripheral. We're mentioning it, but what we're looking at directly, right, is really our priorities. I think it becomes our folk and our people. We just got a plethora of things on the list.
I agree, and I also agree that we may not have the resources to fight our own battles, to be sure. But it reminds me of where Jesus called out, the woman with the one, with one talent, one.
Oh, the two mites.
Right.
The two mites.
She didn't have the resources,
right,
to give that, whatever, but she gave what she had. She gave what she could. I'm not sure if we are not, we're probably not, we're probably much closer to her than we would be even to like the Good Samaritan, who had the resources to look out for, the Good Samaritan.
Oh, the Good Samaritan.
Yeah, the Good Samaritan had the resource to do something about it. The woman with two mites did not.
Right.
We might be closer to that, but we can borrow, from both. And I don't think it should be. I don't think we should only react when it's when it's our fight or when it's our struggle. I think we should bring the weight of our moral force. We've got that in spades in the Black community. We really do.
So then the question is, because again, I agree, but then there is the question in my mind is, how do you fight all of these fronts? If you go back to World War II, America was fighting two wars at the same time. You're fighting over in Europe, and then you're also fighting the Japs over in Asia, right? And I think at some point our people we get exhausted.
Where I would disagree with that, with that analogy, is that one is a fight with weapons, which is exhaustible. The other one is a fight with love, which should not be exhaustible. It should be easy enough to say, Father Garcia, Father Ramirez, this is Pastor John Stevenson. We see what's going on with the news. We see what you're trying to do over there at St. Christopher or St. Viator. How can we help? If nothing else, can we just meet for lunch and can I lift you up? If all I do is lift our spirits, is that enough? Or is there something else me and my church can do for you and your church to express the kind of love?
But I think that's where the challenge is. As you said, the woman with the two mites really didn't have the resources.
Exactly, but she did what she had. And so
she dealt with what she had, right? But if I'm going to get in the fight with you, and I'm over here fighting for the enemies, right? And when you say pastors, a lot of times people don't understand the challenges, the daily challenges, right? Especially African-American pastors in most cases, right? Evangelicals, they can put a budget on a piece of paper and they're going to get their budget to handle evangelism, missions, international, global missions. They're going to get their budget January 30th, right? Which they're going to have their whole budget for the rest of the year, right? So anything after that is extra. But what a lot of people don't understand with the Black church, in many cases, we're taking minimum resources and trying to fairly or equally divide it among multiplicity of issues and problems. So in other words, because I'm not going to get, Black church ain't, Wealthy Place ain't going to get its budget in January for the whole year of 2025. We're actually working Sunday from Sunday to Sunday to Sunday. And then in some of them Sundays, we're going to come up short. And so now you got to somehow figure out how you're going to create some kind of special gift, special offering, some kind of fundraiser to try to just make up for the Sundays that you fell short. Like I'll give you a great example. The African American church tends to struggle in certain parts of the year. So January, December, November, December, January is a type for finance. Why? Because November is Thanksgiving.
Okay.
People are moving around, buying food, traveling. In the next 30 days, you got Christmas. People buying Christmas gifts, people traveling, people moving around. So whenever it's time for me to travel, time for me to do and participate in the holiday, that's when I pull back from giving to the church and I keep it in my pocket. So that's less money the church is making. Mm-hmm. Then you go into January, now you're moving into New Year's, mm-hmm. right? So now January to about February is a reboot for most of your congregants because they then gave out from November, December, and 1st of January. Mm-hmm. So then you have that time of January to about maybe May, right? Where there's no traveling, holidays, where people are moving, so forth and so on. But then you got the summer vacation. Mm-hmm. So for the next 3 months, people are traveling, moving around, kids out of school. Mm-hmm. So the church comes on the back, they fall on the back end. Mm-hmm. So we have the challenge of trying to feed the hungry, try to take care of the homeless. You got members, okay, this member just lost a family member, but they didn't have no burial insurance, mm-hmm. no life insurance. Mm-hmm. So now we got to figure out how to help bury their loved one, or somebody just got put out of their apartment. Mm-hmm. So now either we gonna help them stay in the apartment, so we got to catch up, because most of the time they won't come to you when they're 1 month behind. They wait till they're 3 months behind with all of the attorney fee. Right, so we're actually pulling out of one pot mm-hmm. to take care of multiplicity of challenges, right? So when you say to us, and I would agree, there are some things that we can do mm-hmm. to offer our assistance from the standpoint, maybe we come, we have lunch, we encourage you. Okay, that don't cost nothing. Right. But then when you get to the point where now you want us to help bail such and such out of this and bail such a man, we got so much stuff over here we trying to do just to keep the light. Let's stay with just keep the lights on. Right. That I think then becomes the challenge for the African American church, or the average African American church. Because again, you're not dealing with doctors and lawyers. Most of our people are not six-figure members. If you do the Rob Parsleys, you do the Jesse Duplantis, most of the members are 500 front company people, vice presidents. They have their own corporations. They're doctors, they're neurosurgeons, they're high profile lawyers. They're making 6 figures, some of them making 7. Agreed. Most of the people in our congregations they're barely making minimum wage, if you will. And if you're pulling from areas like the historical West, the median income is what, $25,000. Mm-hmm. So now here's this member, or even less, right? So here's this member trying to feed the family. They come to church, and naturally we're going to ask for a tithe. We're going to ask for offering. That's your reasonable service. But you got some people, man, they can't afford to do it. It's either now I've got to sit and make this major decision. Right, I got to make a choice. I got to make life decisions. Do I feed my family? Do I put gas in the car so I can keep going to work? Or do I give in this offering and then forego this bill? Right. So, that's the difference. And I think when you understand all of the many things that the church has to do, that us as Black people with our families, all of the bills and stuff that we have to do. And then when you asked us to, you got to get in this fight. Well, I'm already in the fight. I'm in a fight over here trying to survive with just my family. I'm trying to keep the rent paid.
Right.
Or, the church is in a fight because it's trying to support its parishioners and still provide ministry and still, do all of the commissions that God has told us, that Jesus Christ told us to do. Go out to the hedges and the highway and compel men to come. That's expensive. That costs money. To do ministry costs. Feed the hungry. I can feed them if I can't feed myself.
Right.
And Jesus really, that I know of, is about the only one that can take 2 fish, 5 loaves of bread, and then bless it, break it, and then feed 20,000. Most people say, well, 5,000. He fed 5,000. Well, technically, he fed more than 20,000 because that was 5,000 men. So now, Jews have kids. So if they came, they hung out with him. That's the husband. That's the wife with him. So you're talking him taking that, doing a massive miracle of feeding over 15 to 20,000 people. But and to be honest with you, even most African American churches is doing that every Sunday. They taking little fish, little bread, they blessing it, pray over it, and they're able to do a lot of different things with it. But it's still not enough, or it doesn't compare or match what evangelical churches are doing and what the white churches are doing. They build a new church and they pay cash for it. You know what I'm saying? They're paying as they go. Oh man, we got to take out 5 loans, and then we, and then if we go into, somebody get this group, this family get mad at you, then they withhold their monies. So now, now we can't pay the note, right? So now we're going to foreclose on the church. Well, God forbid if you foreclose on the church, now automatically the preacher's stealing the money. Somebody's stealing the money. The first family's stealing the money. Stop it.
So here's the challenge that pops in my mind about what you just laid out, though, is this. If deprivation of a community, or, like we said, Las Vegas, if deprivation of a community brings about division, doesn't that incentivize more deprivation?
Yeah, I agree. I think our people, we just in this upending cycle, man.
Right. So and I never like to buy into this idea of conspiracy of this societal aim to cause it, because I can't prove it. And the reason why I don't, I can believe it, but I try not to. So I put myself through my own little test. If I say they are trying to bring about deprivation, divide us, I challenge myself to say, okay, who are you going to put on? Who are you going to accuse directly of that, and what evidence are you going to bring? To support your claim about this one person. So I try not to.
I don't think it's a person. I don't think.
I try to be vague like that. I try to put more
but I don't think it's a person that's causing it. I think it's a system. I think.
I do think I agree with that.
I think we have been. I think the system is designed to cause the disparity, the injustice, to cause the division.
Right.
Because where there is no unity, man, you can't expand.
Exactly.
You can't grow.
Exactly. Nor can you do. And I think absent unity, basically the opposite of division, you can't do much about deprivation.
No, you can't.
And so
you can't.
What I have in mind when I talk about, because I thought a lot about what you said on our earliest podcasts about the imperative, for unity, wherever that is. In that context, you were talking about, the African American pastors coming together and being unified, which ostensibly would bring about unity of the communities that those pastors, shepherd and the like. So a concentric circle of one unity brings another circle of unity, which will bring about the change we want to see in the African American community. I've since then, thinking about that, thought about maybe another version of that unity ought to be to whereas again a unity in the clergy, in that if Father Ramirez comes to Pastor Stevenson and says, "Hey, I'm about to have Governor Sisolak come through. We're going to have a talk with him about immigration." And they're like, "We have some concerns that, we want to see a moral, more compassionate, more just version of it. Will you join me?" Pastor Stevenson should say, "Yes, I'm going to show up." Not only that, let me call, Minister Muhammad over at the masjid and ask him to come too, because I know he feels this, similarly about this. And I'm going to call Rabbi, Cohen on the other phone and say, "Hey, Rabbi, can you show up? Because Reverend Garcia is about to be with the governor. It'd be good if he saw unity in the clergy, on this particular issue."
Yeah, but I believe one of the challenges, you can't talk about unity and bring other people from outside into your set or into your space if your space is not cohesive. And
won't it always lack some degree of cohesion to somebody?
I know if you go to other major cities, you got pastors that don't like each other. Okay. But for the common good, they'll come together. They're going to unify for their communities. Places like Chicago, Detroit.
Right.
If the issue is clear. Yeah, I know coalitions of bishops and pastors in Detroit, that they have a coalition, and they come together, and then they support one another internally. So if I'm doing something, you're going to come to me, I'm going to go to you. Right. Even when it comes to community issues in the state, even to the point politically,
right.
They're going to come together to decide this is the governor we're voting for.
Okay. But let's say in Chicago, that Black coalition that comes together, do they have it either by capacity or disposition to say, okay, we need to, to back our Hispanic Catholic brothers just on this issue? Will they come together and bring the weight of the moral force of their coalition to back, a group not their own?
I think,
and if they don't, should they?
I think again, the reason why they're not involved at that level, I won't say not interested. I think we're all interested about, mistreatments and injustice, no matter who it is, right? Mm-hmm. But I think, again, in these areas and communities, they're so inundated with their issues and their problems as Black people that they're so honed in on trying to resolve their scenarios, their situations, what they're faced with in whatever the communities, whether it's Chicago, Detroit, Atlanta, whatever. That I think that was one of the amazing things about Black Lives Matter movement, right? Is because Black Lives Matter movement incorporated everybody, even though the theme was about Black lives. George Floyd was the kickoff, but then we got everybody involved, white folk, Black folk, which then made it, now it was scary to America. It was scary to the politicians and to those that were creating systemic racism, right? Because now here's this thing is growing and it's unified, and they're marching and they're standing up and they're demanding the laws to be changed, But I think
a coalition.
Yeah, but I think our challenge with that is that it's hard to bring people into, or you to go to them and participate with them when you're not organized yourself. So you got to remember, man, if you go back historically, King and them eventually reached out to the white pastors, to the Jews. He had all kinds of people, especially I think when it came to Selma. When it came to the Selma March, man, they were reaching out to everybody. They was crossing all kinds of religious boundaries, but they were unified. Okay. Right? They knew the cause. They knew everybody was on the same page. By this time, you done got what's his name? Snicky.
Stokely Carmichael.
Yeah, you kind of got him on board. Now he's aligning himself, and so there was the unity within. So it's easy to bring people from outside into your group because now we're going to tell you this is what we're fighting for. This is the theme.
Right.
But when you're in a community that's heavily divided, it's almost dangerous to bring outsiders in, right? Because now they can wield whatever their agendas are. They can make statements on what they want to accomplish, and so now you just create more division. I think first that has to happen is the community has to become divided. If you ask right now, man, to this community, this historical West Side community, what is it that you want to see? Oh, come on, man. You know, like I know, you're going to get 25 different answers.
And that's if you ask 20 different people.
And that's if you ask 20 different people.
Right.
You understand what I'm saying?
Right.
So, you know, and I always say it, and it's not, I don't try to throw shade, but it's the fact.
Right.
I just
historically,
think,
you know,
historically, for a long time, this city, this community has been divided. Part of the division was they were divided because they were made to be divided.
Right.
Again, I think it's systematic. I think it's systemic. It's built into the system, right? Especially in the West, especially in certain parts of the country. It's built into the system. It's not designed, just like, you know, in my opinion, some of our problems as Black people could be resolved because just use the NBA as an example. NBA is what, 90% Black, right? Most of that 90% Black are millionaires. Some of them are multimillionaires, right? When their careers is over, they'll be billionaires, right? So here's the deal. Why don't the Black athletes bring their wealth together to create some wealth in these Black communities? Right. Think about it, man. If you brought Magic Johnson's 1.3 billion, you brought Michael Jordan's 3.2 billion and put it together, we ought to have banks in every Black community across this country, right? Being able to give out loans, being able to help with building housing, all of the issues that we're dealing with. We got enough Black athletes that are millionaires and billionaires that if they brought their funds together, and ain't saying you got to do, we ain't telling you to be broke. You know, you just, man, everybody give 5% of your wealth. Put it in the pocket, put it in the pool, right? And let's distribute it to our African-American communities. Man, come on. Now we got resources. We got something to work with. Right. We're not depending on government monies because like I'm telling them here in the historical West, housing is not going to solve this problem. You need housing. Yes, we need affordable housing for people, but the building housing on the historical West Side, it's not going to resolve the lack of economy, resources, right? You need monies to be filtered. You need wealth to be filtered in that's not government control. Because in a minute, and most of them are basing the housing on government funds. Right. Government funds. Come on, man. And with this administration, who's taking away everything that seems like it could be helpful to any marginalized community, he's snatching it away. Right? It's a sad thing. We're looking at him trying to take away the nonprofit status of Harvard. Who would think to do that, man? Top school, one of the top schools in the country. Who would think to do that? Right. It is a historical institution. So, you know, I think we got to rethink and we got to stop being divided. Some cases it's selfish. You know, I get it. And these people are probably being philanthropists and humanitarians, and they're probably investing certain percentages into their charities of their choice and communities of their choice and schools of their choice. But again, that's something that's trying to establish a name for you. Because if you give to UNLV and give them a wing, who you think they're going to name the wing after?
Right.
You, right? So, this is about you and your legacy. But this community is just it's so divided, and everybody wants to be the chief. So we ain't got no Indians. There ain't no Indians in this community. Everybody trying to be the chief, trying to be the voice. Nobody can really tell you what they want as a community. As a community, as a community, what do we want to see? You can't get them to come together on the issues. Again, I think that the project of the hotel casino is something that would be an engine. It's going to provide jobs. You got a man that wants to invest a certain percentage back into the community to help in various areas, education, nonprofit organizations, small businesses, providing training and trades, which ultimately that wealth can reinvest into building, single family housing. So it provides opportunity for first time builders. Nobody wants to live in an apartment forever. Right. Wants to live in an apartment for 30 years, right? And not have ownership. Right. But I think it's built in the system. I really think it's systemic. It's built into the system. It's designed to keep Black people down, keep them divided, keep them with no resources. For us to go out and sit at Home Depot and put a whole roof on, for a little or nothing, that's too much like slavery for us. You know what I'm saying? I think, and for us, man, I think we have to change our thinking, because there are other urban communities that are growing and expanding, and they're I pastored in North Philadelphia, I pastored in South Central LA. You go through South Central LA now, even though it's mainly Hispanic, it's probably about 93% Hispanic now, but man, they done built grocery stores and shopping plazas, and because of their cohesiveness, their unanimity. And so whenever they are fighting for something, they're fighting it. You got 300 strong, man, they hanging out of the council chambers, because it's 300 strong fighting for this one issue. And we demand monies for da 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 da. They go to the school district, they all wearing the same T-shirt. And then they pack up the school district and they're fighting for whatever that one thing or two things for education for their kids. But us, man, we're divided. We can't get on the same page. Everybody wants to be the chief. Nobody wants to become subservient to the one that maybe have more experience or been around the longest. New stuff here is hard. Mm-hmm. Change is difficult for people to embrace change. We had one lady that came to a planning meeting, and she talked about how she was at ground zero next door to the potential Harlem Nights project, right? Jackson Hotel project. And so we were sitting there, she was like, and if they build it, it's going to, it's going to mess us up and things are going to go up. And we're sitting there saying that's what you want. Mm-hmm. Your property might be worth $50,000, maybe $100,000 at this point, mm-hmm. but you want it to go. He builds this, then your property value goes up. Right now, your property is probably worth $1.3 million. Mm-hmm. But I think it's in the system. Yeah, I really do.
I do too. I'll close with this story from World War II that I think is something we're thinking about. Circling back to how we got for one another. Outside of our own groups. in World War II, the Nazis were looking to round up Jews in Bulgaria, and there was this scene where they had they were cramming Jews on the train cars, and in Eastern Orthodox religion, their pastors or bishops, they're called metropolitans.
Okay.
And in this instance, there's one metropolitan curule. He's like 6'3", 6'5", but with that mitre hat.
Okay, made him about 6'6", 6'7".
Yeah. And so he came down, to that train station where they were loading Jews on. Him and like a handful of his other, ministerial people and his parishioners, and he confronted the Nazis, there, and he said these words that you would recognize, as related to to the Jews. He goes, "Where you go, I go." Who's that from the Old Testament? That harkens back to, I think it was what I forgot her name just that quick. Where she went with her mother-in-law.
Ruth.
Ruth. Yes. I started to say Rebecca. I was like, it's not Rebecca.
Yeah.
It was Ruth.
Naomi and Ruth.
Yeah.
Naomi was
where
the
you
mother-in-law.
go, I go.
Yeah.
The Nazis backed off. They drew, because Metropolitan Curule and his group,
was the voice of
exactly, and so the mayor of Bulgaria talked to Nazis and said, "Look, hey, this ain't the place for it." I'm not certain that isn't probably the most Christ-like, examples of a little bit of love challenging a lot of power, and love won out.
Yeah.
To this day, the Holocaust memorials, whatever, they tell that story, and I'm not sure if that's not the story, if that's not an approach, that we should, give strong consideration.
Oh yeah, I do. I think leaders,
and they weren't organized.
I think leaders ought to speak to power.
Right.
I think that this is a season where we need to speak to power,
Mm-hmm.
and we need to let power know that when you're wrong, you're wrong. When you're out of step and out of line,
Mm-hmm.
you need to correct what you're doing. But I think we need to, I think leaders need to speak to power,
Mm-hmm.
and not be afraid to speak to power.
Agreed. And not necessarily wait for the community to be in unison before they speak to power.
Yeah, well, I think unison can come once they see that there's a voice. See, that's
Exactly.
Again, that's one of the problems here. There's no one voice. And I get it. We'll never go back to the king era.
The
king,
we may, but it has to be really, really bad.
No,
it has to be really bad once you get there.
The king era, meaning that our people in that era listened to one man.
And right, it's because the desperation was so acute,
right?
That we didn't have time, we didn't have the luxury of being nitpicky, about our leaders. We had to, everyone was in the same boat, and everyone was saying the same thing.
Right.
Everyone had to, you just couldn't lay back like that. So we may be on that trajectory. I hope we don't.
Yeah, but in this season, it's a little different. I think we'll never listen to one person, right? Because our people will never give one man power like that, right? If you notice, evangelicals, the Caucasian community, they're back behind the one voice, the one power, that's Trump. Mm-hmm. Trump is the voice. He is the brand of MAGA, right? Back in the 60s, we had the one voice that was King. Even Malcolm X eventually had to align himself, right, with King, right? So King really became that one voice. He became the leader per se. But in this season, I don't see there being one voice or one leader. I think leaders have to come together to make the one voice, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. Back to Martin Luther King, going back again, those leaders that were sub leaders or lieutenants came under the voice of the one leader.
Mhm.
And so then they followed. So you had the Ralph Abernathy's, you had the Jesse Jacksons. They were leaders in their own circles,
Mhm.
right? The Andrew Youngs, but they submitted themselves, right, under the voice of who they selected as the one leader.
Mhm.
Well, in this season, you're not going to get leaders to just totally submit to a one voice leader, right? So the challenge then becomes, how do you unify the leaders of the community or the leaders of various ministries and churches to come and unify their voice to become one?
Mhm.
That's where we are now.
Agreed.
Right. So if you take, say, Wealthy Place, you take Second Baptist, you take Pentecostal Temple, Victory Baptist, those are right there in that cluster, right? So they are leaders who are leaders of their congregations. Their congregations are not necessarily going to listen to another leader, right? So it's going to take those 5 guys that are leaders to come together, sit down, and say, okay, what do we want to do? What do we agree on?
Mm-hmm.
And is this something that we all can talk on with the same voice, giving the same message, so that when you go back to your different congregations, we're talking the same thing, even though it's you talking
Mm-hmm.
to your people and I'm talking to my people, we're saying the same thing, which then gives us the unity of these leaders.
Agreed.
But right now, it seems that we can't get that in this community, and that's what we've got to get to.
Okay, so we should have a podcast on how we get there.
Let's do it.
All right,
let's do it.
This was good stuff.
Yeah.
We did it again.
Thank y'all.
We did it again.
Thank y'all for tuning in.
Yeah, I hope you guys. Yeah. Thank you for saying. Yeah. We hit this one hard.
Yeah. So it's good.
This will conclude another one of our Nehemiah Project Podcast. Thank you for sitting with us. I think we went over the little hour. But it was good content. But I do want to explore this issue of unity and the like, because to your point, and I'll just make this last statement. There's 2 ways to sing a song, either as a solo artist or as a choir.
Right.
So if you're going to sing a song of freedom, you're going to sing a song of justice, you're going to sing a song of equality, you're going to sing a song of restoration. You can do it as an individual or you can do it as a choir.
Right.
And I think what you're correctly alluding to is that we may never have a solo artist, to sing a song. It may be the choir of leaders that come together and sing those songs. And we might be better for it.
And I think we've tried it. I think it was effective for some people in some scenarios. The solo artist mentality, if you will, a factor, had its benefits, right? But you got to remember, whenever a person went solo, they disbanded. They ended up fracturing the group, right? So when David Ruffin went solo from the Temptations, it fractured the group for a minute. That eventually they had to find a replacement. The replacement had to somehow acquiesce to the style of the Temptations, right? Meanwhile, David Ruffin was out here soloing, but he wasn't as effective as he was when he was with the Temptations, right? But in some cases, it worked for people like Lionel Richie. It worked for Michael Jackson. It worked for Diana Ross.
We can debate about Lionel Richie.
Okay.
Because I would agree he sold a bunch more records, but I now we've got to go off another tangent. I would just say with Lionel Richie, he sold a bunch more records, but I think he went from being an absolute royalty in the Black community.
Oh yeah, He crossed all the way over.
Which you can do and still be a serious artist. I think he wiped away a lot of the luster and the gravitas that he had, as one of the Commodores. To being kind of a poppy.
But see, that's I guess that's the point. The point is, you lose something when you go solo.
You can.
You gain strength when you unify.
Right.
Now, it's a lot of work. There's very few groups that's still out there that have stayed together for 40, 50, 60 years. Right. Case in point, the OJs. They still touring.
Yeah.
And all them guys, is, with the exception of Nolan Grant, Eddie Levert and Walter, they in their 80s.
Mm-hmm.
They can't even do the steps in the move no more, right?
Right.
But they figured out how to somehow stay together, And so, there's power in numbers, man.
That's true.
And even if you lose, because you will lose people along the way, but, if you can keep the core of the group, you can always add somebody into the group, add new voices, add new flavor, whatever.
The Rolling Stones.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Did it for years.
And how they're alive is a mystery to me,
Yeah, because they got to be in their late 80s, almost.
If not 100.
Yeah, man, So, yeah. All right, man.
We about to get rolling.
Yeah, we got to get going again. Thank you, sir.
Talk.
Appreciate it.
Yes.
We'll do it again.
And again, this concludes another one of our Nehemiah Project Podcast. Thank you all for listening with us.